Moving on to the next question. Amy asks, hey Cam, my question is how to interpret the stelliums in my chart. Would the inner planet stellium take precedence over the other? I'm really struggling blending the 8th house stellium, besides it's a cluster F, LOL. So Amy gave us her information, so let me go ahead and pull this up for you guys so you can see it. I haven't even looked at this chart yet, so I just picked this question because it had to deal with stelliums, which I thought this would be a great question to ask. So her info is September 5th, 1983, at 10:45 p.m. in Newcastle, Pennsylvania. Newcastle, Lawrence County, yeah. Calculating. Okay, so she is speaking about stelliums. So here, this is actually a good point. So let's define what a stellium is. Now, we're going to come back to that chart in just one moment. But let's define what a stellium is. Everyone is going to argue with you about this, by the way. That's one of my favorite things about astrology. Like, you might be like, what's this exact thing? And someone will tell you, but then someone else will be like, that's wrong. Everyone argues about everything in this world, in this community, and that's just how it goes. So let me tell you how I define a stellium. It's 3 or more planets leaning on the more side. So if it's 3 planets, in my opinion, it's got to be more. It's got to be not the sun, moon, and Venus, because, or not the moon, the sun, Venus, and Mercury. If you have the sun, Venus, and Mercury in one sign and you think you have a stellium, I'm here to pop your bubble, and I don't think you do. My argument is the sun, Mercury, and Venus, the majority of the time, are in the same exact sign. They're never really farther away, not too far away from each other. Mercury is never farther than 23 degrees from the sun. I need to refresh my memory on that. And Venus is never farther than, I believe, 45 or 48 degrees away from the sun. So typically, the sun, Mercury, and Venus are always in the same signs. So I don't consider that a stellium. However, let's look at this chart a little bit and think, and let's see if that fits that definition. Moon, Mars, Venus. I wouldn't consider this a stellium. Like, and it's not because it's not 3 or more planets. It's just kind of not, I don't know. I just think, like, I know people with, like, for example, my stepdad has, like, he has Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn all in Aquarius. Oh, and his sun. So he has Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, literally all the planets except his moon in Aquarius. That's a stellium. That's like, whoa, everything you've got going on is there. Versus this is like, okay, if you want to say that you have a stellium, okay, I'll give that. Maybe I wouldn't be as liberal with that, but the reason being is, the moon, Venus, and Mars and Venus are only ever together for a short little while. Plus, this is like a Venus retrograde, so I think that matters. Plus, it's Mars, Venus, Moon in the IC. Clearly, there's a lot of Leo stuff. But I think this is also another good example is all of this. Now, I don't like using the word stellium for just anything, but this is a lot going on here. I think what's more important is you have Jupiter on Uranus with Neptune in Sagittarius, where let me go over your question again. Would the inner planet stellium take precedence over the other? So what Amy is asking, does this stellium take precedence over this stellium? That's actually a really good question. And yes and no, but let me explain how things take precedence. So number one, this takes precedence because these are inner planets. We're talking about the moon. We're talking about your emotions. You are a night chart. So this is your like luminary of sect. This is a very big part of your life. If you're not familiar with sect, night versus day charts, if you're a night chart, the moon's more important. If you're a day chart, the sun's more important. You're a night chart, so the moon is very important in your chart, right? And it's also in Leo. This is also in your 4th house of like home, family, living situation. And you have Venus retrograde, which is your ascendant ruler, and it's squaring your ascendant too. So like Venus is the planet that rules your 1st house. So that's also a big deal. Mars is almost the least significant part of it. But Mars there adds to the, the energy, the drive. In fact, these are all of your sect mates all together in the fourth house. So, like, let's say you were a day chart and this was the moon, Mars, and Venus. I'd be like, yeah, Mars is probably more important versus in a night chart, the Venus is your benefic of sect and Mars is your malefic of sect. So these are the planets that are on your team. And one of them is your ascendant ruler. So this is a pretty big deal here. However, these are more related to, like, for example, how I would take this in terms of precedence. Well, I really wouldn't even look at it as precedence. I always look at everything as timing. So, like, for example, like Venus activations will be really big when you're like 24 and 36 because it's a lot about coming into your body and yourself and your identity. But what's really big about this is long term. So I want you to think in terms of cycles. Like, I think this is so important with astrology is like, okay, the moon, Mars, and Venus, if we're looking at your whole life, let's say you're going to live to you're 80 years old. Let's look at how many spins around the sun each one of these planets can do. The moon is going like this. Mars and Venus are going like that. So those planets take up much more of your day to day. Like, for example, the outer planet stuff is like your legacy, career. Are you going to, big life stuff that takes a long time. And if you have big life goals, of course, there's a lot of your life that focuses on these big life things. However, there's stuff like, you still got to, you got to take a shower every day. You got to eat 2 or 3 meals a day. You got to do this. You got to do that. Those things that take up your like everyday thinking, that's Moon, Venus, Mars. So when you ask what takes precedence, it's like, well, no matter what, Jupiter, Uranus, South Node, and Neptune, that's all happening for sure. And we'll talk about that. But I think this is more distracting. So, for example, the moon, Venus, Mars are like some of the brightest bodies in the sky. That's much more distracting, and you're going to see that and feel that much faster, much more often versus this, Jupiter, Uranus, and Neptune, they take their time going around. So, but these are bigger waves. I want you to think of everything in frequency and waves. Think of things like Mars and Venus and the moon as in like blue light, where blue light is on a fast. If you're not familiar with frequencies in the light spectrum, I'm not that familiar with it either, so I can break it down to you in a dumb way. Red light is very low frequency. It's like, imagine like if you produce music, think of a sine wave and a sine wave going really like slow versus the bluer you get the light, so you go from like red into like a yellow into like a blue into a white. It's just that wave getting faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. Now I think of the blue light planets, like the things that are really fast frequency. That's all the inner planets because it's, everything that we're doing versus the red light stuff is really bouncy, very wavy, and our bodies have different effects of that. Like something I didn't know until not that long ago, your body can't perceive UV rays. So like, for example, your body doesn't know when it's being exposed to like UV radiation. It only knows that through blue light. So when your eyes know that it's taking in blue light, your blood retracts away from your skin versus when you are in red light, like if you're familiar with red light therapy and any of this stuff, the red light actually brings the blood up to your skin because the blood repairs the skin and stuff like that. But your body knows, your body actually associates blue light with UV radiation. It can't actually take in UV radiation, but it associates the two. And so when there's blue light around, your body physically react. You have a physiological difference in your body that you are not in control of, depending on the light situation that you're in. And I bring this up because, for example, that blue light, this light that I'm recording under, this is blue light versus later on tonight, like I turn on red lights after once the sun goes down because I want my body to get into like a state of like sleep or rest and go into like a nighttime mode. But those two different things are going to do two completely different things, right? And so when it comes to like the moon and Venus and Mars, this is blue light stuff. This is like your cell phone, your computer, stuff that's all about versus versus this stuff, the stuff that takes a little bit longer. It's the same thing with like if you're familiar with the what's that telescope they just put out that they've been waiting forever to do? James Webb Telescope. The James Webb Telescope is going to be seeing in like super deep infrared. And because of that, we'll be able to see like pretty much at the beginning of the universe because you could see farther with red light. But anyway, when it comes to the outer stellium stuff, this is a little bit bigger deal. So like, for example, a lot of us, like, let's say, for example, if you were born between 1988, I think, and 1996, you have Uranus and Neptune in Capricorn. So you have two planets already in Capricorn. But let's say you also have Jupiter and the moon, right? So that's 4 planets. You could consider that a stellium. But everyone has Uranus and Neptune in Capricorn. And I would much more look at you as Jupiter and the moon I would look at them as 2 separate conjunctions together and combine those together as just like a stellium. Like, for example, I think what's more important in this stellium, and this is how I read stelliums, by the way. This is kind of why I picked this question, because I wanted to answer this. How do you interpret a stellium? There's a few different ways. And again, people are going to argue on this. Everyone has their own different opinions on this because that's how astrology goes. Number one is look at which planets are aspecting each other. So, for example, the South Node. So you could be like, I have the South Node on Neptune, but you kind of don't, because the South Node goes retrograde. So, in fact, it's red right now, so it's technically retrograde, so it's technically direct. But the nodes move backwards. So that means the South Node is actually heading this direction towards Scorpio. And Neptune is not going that way. Neptune's going towards Capricorn. So they have already met and passed each other. So yes, you can say you have Neptune and the South Node together, and again, they're about 5 degrees apart. You know, is that going to play a role in the long term of your life? Yes, but they're not like, again, I think when it comes to this stuff, you want to look for the exact. Like if you had, let's say you had the South Node at 26 degrees and you had Neptune at 21, then it'd be like, yes, like the South Node is applying to Neptune. That is significant. Versus this is separating. It happened before you were born. So it's not going to play too much more of a further role later on in life. Versus if these were switched, this would mean like at a certain point in your progress chart, Neptune would hit the South Node. So that would activate something. Versus it's already happened, so it's not going to activate again. It already happened. But that's different with Jupiter and Uranus. Jupiter's on its way to conjoin Uranus, which means at some time in your secondary. So this all goes back to natal promise stuff. Like this is all stuff that is promised one day that is going to happen. And Jupiter's 2 degrees away from Uranus. That means a couple like years after you were born in your secondary progress chart, Jupiter would have conjoined Uranus exactly. And that would have signified something. And it would have been in your 8th house. So it would have been something to do with like death or other people's money. I mean, you would have been like probably, a little bit younger. So probably not that crazy. But anyway. So this isn't just like, oh, I have a stellium in the 8th house. For one, it's Neptune. I think Neptune is like maybe you idealize 8th house stuff, but they're eluding and confusing anyway. You have the South Node there, which I feel like just saying you have a stellium is like doing a disservice to your South Node. Like you have the fucking South Node in your 8th house. That's a whole different story, because when you have like, let's say you have a bunch of planets in one sign, but then you have the South Node there. Well, if you have a bunch of planets in one sign, that just means there's a lot of energy there. And of course, each situation is going to be specific. But when you have the South Node, this is like, whoa, this is kind of like a bigger, deeper part of your life that is really like, can be holding you back. There's going to be a lot of loss. There's going to be a lot of draining and relearning and going back and forth. And there's a lot of push and pull. And so like the South Node in the 8th house is very like, not being able to always rely on other people's resources. You have Jupiter and Uranus in the 8th house. It's like random access to other people's money and resources. Woo, it's all great. But the South Node's there and it's on top of Neptune. So maybe maybe you kind of idealize that a little bit more. And the North Node's in your 2nd house. You need to be a little bit more like independent, focus on your own money, resources, and things like that. But I would also look at this as if you have a stellium and you want to know more about it, look to the ruler. Neptune is in Jupiter's house. South Node is in Jupiter's house. Uranus is in Jupiter's house. And guess who's home? Big Daddy Jupiter. And Jupiter's walking into the door to Uranus, so there's a surprise party, and Jupiter loves surprise parties. So your 8th house is a fucking party, but it's like the south node. It's like a party celebration when you're not in the mood for it. So Jupiter conjoining Uranus too, being the ruler of all of this, is like, for example, let's say you want to know more about all these planets. Well, all of these planets are ruled by Jupiter, and we want to look at Jupiter's condition. And of course, it's in its favorite sign, in its terms, and its decan, and it's on Uranus. So this is like a very beneficial, uplifting, electric, random, destabilizing area. So like, I would just almost look at this as like, does this take I think the answer to the question, does this take precedent? Well, in 8th house circumstances, yeah. Well, because for example, your moon, Venus, Mars is so focused on family living situation. It's like all of a sudden, if one day you get access to a bunch of wealth or other people's resources, and then you can buy a house, which means that you can secure your living situation, then yeah, this might take precedence over this. But day-to-day stuff, this is going to take precedence over that, if that makes sense. You're not always going to be 8th housing with all these bigger outer planets with it. But anyway, I hope that answers the question. Before I go into the next one, I need another drink.